Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tips and Tools on TherapyCable.com. I'm Dr. Carlos, behavioral psychologist, and my co-host.
I'm Dr. G, clinical psychologist. Welcome.
Today we're going to be looking inside the mind of the addict. What's going on in there? Do they perceive the world like you and I do? We'll find out and more with Dr. G. Welcome, Dr. G.
Thank you.
So this is interesting today because we're going to go into a philosophical bent. We're going to look inside the mind of an addict and see if it's, how would you say, working in a similar fashion to a person who's not an addict. But before that, there is a question I've been getting a lot from our viewers out there. And one of them is, do addicts have a conscience?
Good question.
And that's a tricky one, I think.
That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. But, when you say, how is it working? I would like to reframe that. Let's look at how it is not working. How it is not working. And that's really the key point here, because, and that should also shed some light on some of our anxieties and worries. You see, our expectation of people who are struggling with drugs is that their mind is working like ours. Therefore, we are surprised when we see they take the actions that they're taking, because a sound mind shouldn't be taking those actions. And that's what we're surprised by. And a lot of times the disappointment, the pain, the hurt comes from that. So if we just change that mindset from the onset and understand that their mind is not working like ours, and in fact, it's just not working. It's not functional. It's not working at its highest capacity, if you will, or to the most possible functional, effective extent that it should be, then we understand that we are really working or interacting, dealing with a dysfunctional mindset.
It reminds me of Criminal Minds, the TV show. When I started watching that, I realized this comes from a psychological angle.
Yeah.
But the minds of the criminals, the psychopaths, these serial killers, they're not the same as us. But yet, a lot of times we try to answer the question, how could you do that as a human being?
Exactly.
But the problem is they're not thinking like we are.
Yeah,
so you're saying this is kind of similar. Not that they're psychopaths,
Right.
but that addicts don't look at the world the same way.
Right.
Is that similar? Is that safe to say?
Yes, there is a lot more irrational, distorted, I would say, unfitting and inappropriate, and again, very inefficient and ineffective ways of experiencing the both inner world and the external world. And with that, I can also address your question of if they have conscience, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. They do. Addicts are just like, because they're human being, every human being has conscience. For the majority of human beings, so there are always exceptions. So most human beings have conscience, as far as we know, right? And especially the ones that we are dealing with in terms of friends, family members, co-workers who are, let's say, struggling with addiction. So what's going on? What's wrong with that conscience then? One person may ask, like, how come if they have conscience, how does that not rescue them? How does that not change the course of actions or decisions that they're taking?
Like if you're a mom who's an addict and you have children, some people wonder, well, how can she still do that with the two little kids? We'll say 3 and 7 years old for the sake.
Right.
But does she not see the pain? Does she not see the danger that she's putting them in there? Or have they over-rationalized what's going on in their world?
That's what the dysfunction is about. You see, the conscience that she has and the way it is integrated within her overall being and experience of the world, as you mentioned, in relation to her children or in relation to her responsibilities as, let's say, a responsible working mother in whatever capacity, a caretaker who has certain duties, obligations, including, for instance, availability, being available emotionally, mentally, physically to her children. All that relationship, if you will, between these components is out of whack. It is distorted. So the conscience is there, but it is not well integrated. It's not harmonious to a point where it can more or less, if you will, fit into the entire picture in an effective way to deliver the right answer, to help the mother recognize that some of her actions should be permanently stopped rather than temporarily overlooked or temporarily remedied. Because if you think about it, and this is a good contrast right here that we can make in terms of temporary versus permanent solutions. A lot of addicts, you notice that they kind of bounce back temporarily at times, right? They're not always under the influence heavily. They're not always sedated. It's just impossible because, let's say they use, let's say marijuana or heroin. They may, use one day to an extent that allows them to kind of relax and escape and avoid problems and kind of check out. But then after a while, at times, they simply bounce back. They kind of realize, you know what, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Or it could be also environmental and situational. They may just run out of money and there's no other way of getting the material. So they kind of go cold turkey because there's no other option, right? So they have kind of bounced back, right? And in that bouncing back trajectory, you may see them making some good decisions. Like, for instance, suddenly they may become regretful, right? And then come back and say remorseful and regretful and come back and ask for your forgiveness. Oh, I know I have done terrible things, so I want a second chance. I want to get back on track. Well, that's the conscience, right? Speaking. That's the part of them trying to get back on track. But the problem with it is that it is temporary. It's transitionary. They have the best solution they can come up with, if you really dissect it and analyze it, is they haven't thought thoroughly through that solution on a long-term basis. For instance, if they are seeking a job, instead of thinking about getting their act together and securing a job that is long-term in their benefit, they may decide to just get a job for a week or two. It's the same thing, right? Getting a job. But they haven't thought thoroughly, like I mentioned, in detail about the ramifications of only a 2-week job. Right? So their mind is not really that functional. Like it's not giving them the real answers, the long-term beneficial answers and decisions they need. It gives them like a short-term solution for some kind of a problem. For instance, let's say they may have stolen a car, like one of their families, or some valuable possessions, and then sold it to someone. And then they realize, oh, I did something wrong, right? And they may go, so, okay, if I get a couple of weeks of a job somewhere, I get enough money to earn that car back, like go and buy it back, right? Mm-hmm. In order to kind of undo what I did in the beginning. So that's a short-term solution to a problem, to an event, without thinking, well, okay, then what are you going to do after 2 weeks? What are you going to do after a month?
Why is that, do you think? Why do they have that kind of mentality, short-term orientation versus a long-term?
Well, that's the whole core component of the addiction cycle, that the mind is gravitating toward a transitionary short-term satisfaction to quell and quench and calm down those inner anxieties that are coming up because of some kind of a void that they're feeling. So that has been really actually the kind of the predisposition and the very beginning, steps into their addiction, because they sought short-term satisfaction to their stress. There is stress, I cannot handle it. There is a cup of whiskey, let me gulp it down. It calms me down. then I can kind of relax. I don't have to be too anxious. Then I can kind of forget the problem for a while. That's a short-term satisfaction.
So it sounds like, now I sound like a psychologist, it sounds like you're saying they've learned their coping skills are short-term. That's what they've learned to do most of their life, even before addiction maybe even?
Exactly. Yeah, it is. Addiction is a short-term coping strategy.
So is it possible to say, and I don't want to label groups, but see how I would phrase this. Here's addiction point of their life. Prior to that, their coping skills have always been short-term for whatever reason. Maybe they've always been emotionally reactive. They haven't really learned how to be able to look at things in the long term.
Right.
And they bump into drugs, and then all of a sudden, this is a quick way to get my problem solved again.
Exactly.
So it could be like that.
In a lot of cases, it is like that, especially if you think about the more younger generation. In the old days, like maybe 30, 40 years ago, you would see people more in their later stages of life, like established adults, who would actually end up in treatment centers. People who had done a lot of things in their lives, they were successful, etc. But then and mostly it was revolving around alcohol. And that's why we have the whole culture of AA for the past, 70-something years. And because the problem was really revolving around people who were hardworking individuals who were hiding their problems for many years while consuming a more or less, alcohol is a depressant, but at the same time also it is anxiolytic. It reduces anxiety because it increases GABA in the neurotransmitter system. So many years they have used this coping strategy to get through the day, even though on a long-term basis they have been able to be successful because they have continued going to work. And it didn't become an issue because alcohol usually doesn't immediately become an issue. There are so many functional alcoholics who go about their work on a daily basis without being detected, or alcohol really influencing and impacting their psychomotor activity to a point where they're actually making major mistakes and problems or encounter problems, such as there are a lot of functional alcoholics who still drive and they don't get into accidents. There's a lot of functional alcoholics who do operate machinery, whether it is heavy machinery or light machinery, and they don't get in problems by chance because it hasn't impacted them as much. But ultimately, when the body is breaking down, when cirrhosis sets in, when vitamin deficiency is impacting the memory system, when breathing is impacted, when the movement of a person is impacted, when the consciousness is impacted to a point where it becomes obvious, right? Then we are suddenly dealing with their addiction problem, or suddenly they start facing their problem, right? But in the old days, as it took so many years for a person to really get to that point of having to face their addiction problem, you had to deal with more of an older generation, like older adults, people more in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. But the drug scene and culture, and also this glamorization of a whole alcohol and drug over the past, let's say, few decades, has changed the scenery to the point where we see nowadays 80% of the addicts are young kids. They are in teenagers, late teens, and most of them in their 20s. Like 90% plus of a lot of of the current residential clients that are at these treatment centers are mostly in their 20s, 20, 22, 25, 27. And now, going back to that short-term satisfaction, think about it. With a person who is in his 30s, 40s, 50s, has had a history of perhaps failures as well as successes. So they have gradually learned, the benefits of long-term gratification, of delayed gratification.
If they gain wisdom.
If they gain
wisdom and experience.
And they have had enough time to kind of being able to look back on history. But the 20-year-old doesn't. So and not only the mindset of a teenager and a person in early 20s is aligned with instant gratification.
Yeah, the drive-through mentality, as they say nowadays.
The drive-through mentalities.
Yeah.
But also, they don't have that many years of experience to be able to even gauge the importance of delayed gratification, because, well, what have they done so far to be able to account for certain accomplishments that are based on delayed gratification? Not that many. So there's two components of a kind of a natural inclination for immediate gratification because your mind hasn't completely developed yet.
That's a big problem too, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely. That's a huge problem.
Because you're damaging that development.
And then you're damaging that development and you're almost freezing it in time, right? You're not allowing that mind to actually have the opportunity of attempting to see the benefits of delayed gratification. Right.
So you're saying, okay, let's say the prefrontal cortex, I think, doesn't fully develop to 25, 26, something like that. So having an addiction problem at 16, 17, that can freeze that? Is it possible for them to develop it again at 100% capacity later if they stop being an addict, let's say at 24? Or do they actually damage, do you know if they
with
damage?
A lot of training, because that's the critical period that we always talk about. You know, the critical period for an infant, if you will, and a toddler to learn language is the first 2 years, right? For language capacity, that's already been established. Now, and can you develop language later on? Yes, you can, but it requires a lot more training, you know, but not to the full extent as a child that has been going through that developmental stage without any encumbrance. And so as far as that, you know, prefrontal cortex and ability for delayed gratification, if the young person who is in his 17, 18 years old and hasn't arrived at that 25 and the next 5, 8, 9 years spending in this impaired level of functioning, they may very well lose that function forever. It really depends on what comes after brain plasticity. Does the brain almost like recompensate for that loss after the 25 if they stop drinking or using alcohol and being dependent on it? More or less cell regeneration. You know, that's the other part that we know so far, as far as my knowledge allows and my understanding of neurogeneration or neurogenesis. After 25 years of age, there is no new neurogenesis or no neurogenesis, meaning no new cells are being developed. It's more of what they call pruning and kind of directing the currently available cells, which is brain plasticity. So it's the rearrangement of cells and redirection and readjustments between these neuronal cells in different brain mass areas that would allow for brain plasticity. For instance, for someone who has lost ability of hearing, for the brain to compensate for that by being able to rearrange some cells in the adjacent areas of the brain that was damaged so that the hearing is regained, at least to some extent, right?
Interesting.
But not because new neurons are being generated. It's rearrangement and reconfiguration of current cells.
Interesting.
That ability, meaning again neurogeneration or neurogenesis, stops at about 25, 26 years of age. Wow. As far as my knowledge allows, as far as the science that I'm aware of, unless newer science is available that shows no, it continues. But so far as I have heard, it stops. So if there are no new neurons being generated after 25, for that addict who has been using, let's say, from 12 years to 25 years of age, or 17 to 25, they're kind of lost that time to be able to generate new neurons, to deal with new information, to develop new talents and skills and options. So they're only working with what they had at the time that the addiction kind of did its damage. Not when it started, but when it finally did its damage, because it takes a few years of constant substance abuse for brain damage, if you will, or arrest to occur. It doesn't happen day one. People who are, for instance, using marijuana, we know marijuana use is linked to brain cell damage. So if they are using it for 2 months, 3 months, that damage is not significant. But if they have used it for 5 years, it's much more significant.
Gotcha.
Right? Or same thing with meth. Methamphetamine is definitely linked to a lot of cell damage and especially brain damage. So depends how many years they have used it and when the onset was.
Hi, welcome to Addicts. This is Addicts Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Addicts Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
So it's safe to say it's important for parents, for teachers, to focus on teaching children, kids at 10 years old, 11 years old, 9, teaching them long-term thinking as well.
Absolutely, that's very, very important, and there have been many studies that actually have shown that success in life is directly and proportionately correlated and linked to the ability of delayed gratification. Children who were prone to short-term satisfaction and getting what they needed immediately without thinking about the long-term consequences, ultimately they grow up being unsuccessful in life. Success requires, and what we mean by success is not just financial success. If you think about it, let's say success as an actor, right? Success as a machine operator, or an engineer, or a psychologist, or a medical doctor, or an attorney, or you name it, right? Any of these accomplishments really are contingent upon a person being able to withstand adversity, obstacles, overcome those obstacles, being able to overlook certain barriers and overcome those barriers, live with pain and discomfort and anxiety and depression and all those mood fluctuations despite the pain that is associated with it and despite the seeming setbacks, in order to ultimately go through some stages, some steps, some phases, and then end up with some kind of an accomplishment, whether that would be a degree in their pocket, or a job offer, or some money in their account. So that type of ability to withstand adversity and live with painful experiences and discomfort for the sake of accomplishing something down the road is a great component of a successful endeavor. And if children are not learning that, if the parents are more or less remiss at teaching them the benefits of this type of a mindset, that it is okay to be uncomfortable, or live in discomfort. It is okay to put up with some pain or displeasure for the sake of, again, accomplishing something, a goal in time. Then they're not teaching their children the virtue and value and methods of obtaining success. What they're teaching them is kind of living life more or less one moment at a time, and mostly, if you think about it, at the mercy of environmental factors. If I'm not planning, let's say if a child is not planning what school they're going to go to, let's say, and if they haven't been taught up until the age of 18, 19, 20, when they get out of the home and they start becoming somebody by themselves and they sign up on the college of their choice, etc. If they haven't been taught that you need to plan that ahead, right? So who is going to plan it for them? Who is going to determine where they're going to end up? The environment. For instance, it could be through peer pressure. It could be through a neighbor telling them what's good, what's not good. It could be through a best friend moving to another city and they're moving with this best friend to another city. These are all environmental, external, situational factors determining the future of their child. Instead of the child saying, you know what, no, I'm not going to move to another city just because my best friend is moving. We're going to remain in touch. There is technology, there is FaceTime and virtual meetings, etc. I'm going to visit that friend because we're so close once a month or once every other month or once a year, depending on availability or resources. But I have a goal in mind. I want to become a scientist working at a certain organization, and I'm willing to go to, I don't know, instead of this city with this friend, I'm going to go to that city without even any friends, because that city offers me that opportunity as a goal, as a stepping stone toward my ultimate goal. That's a plan of action with delayed gratification embedded within it, being able to withstand these anxieties and pressures that, for instance, I don't have a friend in that city, I may not have enough money, or I may not have enough, opportunities that I do have in this city, or enough emotional support, etc. If we are capable, if parents have taught their children, plan your future, put certain goals, and work hard to achieve that, which is delayed gratification, then they're going to end up making decisions based on what's good today, what feels good today.
So they're not beholden to the vicissitudes of life, I guess.
Absolutely.
It reminded me of something when you said that, about looking out to the future.
Yes.
I met with I think it was a CEO of a charter school last year. A charter school in a really poor socioeconomic area. Yeah. And it was amazing when she showed me. She grabs the 8 or 9-year-olds, takes them into a room where they have a map of the United States of America.
Right.
And she shows the children. She'll show the children the map and they say, these are the different states of the country. And what do you want to study? What interests you? And the student may say dance. Just for the sake of it, she'll look and point at New York and say, look, New York has one of the best schools in the country for dance, Juilliard. Yeah. But now the child all of a sudden realizes there's something else besides my little town. Because a lot of times in the poor socioeconomic environments, they don't have money to travel.
Yeah.
So they're kind of stuck in this little town. So whatever their town is usually what their world is.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see the success rate of the school, and there are other factors as well, but the success rate of the school was 100% graduation of high school. Wow. And here's the kicker, it was 100% graduation rate out of college.
Wow.
But it alludes a lot to the point you made. They looked beyond today, and they also looked beyond their geographical boundaries. They just didn't look at the little city. They looked at, I can go anywhere.
Fantastic.
I can go here, I can go there, I can go there. And instead of being anxious, like you were saying, they were able to realize this is an opportunity, not an anxiety for me.
Right.
And it was fascinating to watch, but completely amazing.
Very interesting.
But back to this. So now that's tip number 1, I guess, is to train children long-term, from short-term to long-term.
Absolutely.
But now, how about the individuals, the teenagers, who are already ensnared into the drug addiction problem?
Yeah.
Is it possible to reprogram their mind to go from short-term to long-term?
Yeah. Before I answer that, let's Also, again, thank our sponsor, Elite Care Treatment, and for our viewers who are looking for some answers and support, please check out elitecaretreatment.com, and you can call them at 888-511-0607. And we can really say that, yes, the children who are, or young people who are ensnared in the problem of addiction and culture of addiction, they may not even be using. That's the other thing I want to add here. Like when we are talking about being ensnared in that problem, let's kind of look at the whole big problem. Checking your Facebook and social media, almost, what is it? I think it's about 7 hours a day now, on average, that people in America, United States, are spending about 7 hours a day. That's incredible. 7 hours a day seeking, finding information, being involved in social media and communicating, all those type of things. I mean, 8 hours a day used to be a work day. Now, how do you find another 7 hours? Right? I mean, that's the thing, right? It's mind-boggling. Like, how do individuals really are able to juggle this? Like, work, sleep, spend 7 hours online, and probably 2 or 3 hours of that is just social media, just, kind of posting and checking this and checking that. So that's why I'm saying that's a culture of addiction. We are talking about a culture, our consumption, production, consumption, preoccupation, in these, again, short-term gratification strategies, whether it is, I didn't feel good today in the morning because I woke up and I got that email from this and that, or a text from my peer who says, I hate you because you did that, this and that. So now I have to engage in that type of a strategy of, again, short-term gratification. I have to deal with it right now. And it goes beyond just substance abuse. And that's why the issue of addiction is, pandemic, if you will. It goes into gambling. Many people, use gambling. They're not into coke and heroin and methamphetamine and things like that. But they spend like 7-8 hours a day at a casino. And
7 hours a day.
Yeah, at a casino. And losing, gaining money, losing, and gaining money, and so forth. And then sex addiction. And then online gaming or computer gaming addiction. And then, again, workaholic people. I have an individual, she works, about, I think, what did she say, like 65 to 75 hours a week. And when you really tap into it and ask her how come, she just doesn't do, does do more than 40 hours. And even though she could spend that extra hour with family, grandchildren, this and that, we found out there is a lot of, again, escape strategy here. She doesn't want to deal with all that anxiety and problems that are related to the family environment. So she's delving and diving into a work environment. The four walls around her and her computer. Saturday, Sunday, nobody at work. She just goes there and works and works and works. That's workaholism. That's an addiction as well. And get that, she doesn't get paid.
That's true.
On top of that, it's interesting thing is
salary, yeah.
She's on salary, 40 hours. That's it. She doesn't get paid, and she acknowledges, yes, I know, I'm escaping, I'm avoiding family, I'm avoiding those times. So I'd rather spend time. So this culture of addiction, when you say, boy, how come people are ensnared in that, and then can we change their mind? Can we help them? Yes, we can. Absolutely. But it is very difficult because
you're fighting against society as well, not just the person.
Yes, and think about it. Like, you have to be able to really find yourself.
What does that mean? We hear that a lot. We've heard it from the Maharishi from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Find who you are. What does that really mean?
That's the thing that I would say, what it means,
Another
finding
episode?
yourself. Well, it can be for another episode, but not yet. We have another 10
We have
minutes.
enough time to solve
Enough
that.
time
all right.
to not to solve it, but finding yourself, what we generally mean by that, and this is what I mean by it, is detecting or even creating, at times if you cannot find it or detect it, really creating and dedicating and committing to a purpose. That's what it means. A purpose in your life that jives well with you. It can be anything. To give you an example, I can share almost like my own story. Before becoming a psychologist, I was in the information technology. For 15 years, I was working in a couple of countries, actually, in different languages, different communities, creating websites and putting together systems. I was a systems engineer, webmaster, database designer, analyst, trainer, and so forth. So that was my work, and I was working a lot and making money and had a good life, etc. But it wasn't my purpose. That is, it was an occupation, but at one point it ended. And what I found out was, by going through a kind of a tumultuous journey, after leaving that information technology life behind me and entering the field of psychology, that I found out that therapy is my passion and my purpose. So it wasn't easy at first. It's not easy for a lot of people to really find it. I didn't necessarily easily find it. It was a combination of finding comfort and meaningfulness in this field versus the other field. What I found was that I could easily listen to people. What I found out that people gave me feedback based on that listening. They felt more comfortable. They felt more grounded and more relaxed in their lives. What I found out was that I could easily understand the psychological principles and concepts. What I found out was that there is a lot of demand for it. There are millions of people out there struggling with, how do I talk to my mom? And we are distant and things like that. And for me, it was a no-brainer. For them, it was a problem. So I could easily lend a hand and help this person to overcome that obstacle. These are the things that I found. But it wasn't necessarily, I found the purpose of my life. I created the purpose of my life. The purpose of my life is basically what I have put together through these multiple organizations, as you know, I'm involved in, which is really kind of living life to the full extent of my abilities that is possible on a daily basis, and enjoy that type of a challenge. Like if a challenge is thrown at me, for instance, to work with a group of co-ed addiction clients versus a gender specific, like instead of working with all male group or all female group, what would happen if we worked with a group with males and females? And that may be a challenge by itself. So I put that on my agenda and say, okay, I want to conquer that today. I want to put all my abilities, all my mind, to see if I can effectively deal with this problem and solve it and come out with a sense of gratification. And that is the purpose. The purpose of my life is more or less overcoming these challenges in the field of psychology and psychotherapy. And it could be something like this. How do I turn this educational video into a useful channel of information for people who are out there and could use this to help themselves? So going back to finding yourself, sometimes you have to find some aspects about yourself, but also create yourself, create your purpose. See what's the best you can do that day and be proud of it. Just tell yourself at the end of the day, okay, I'm proud that I gave it all. I gave it all my energy, my cognitive, like my mind and my thinking, my emotional, my behavioral, everything that I am capable I put on the table, I gave it all. I went to the farthest extent possible that I could deliver and make something happen, and this is the result. And then learn from it. If it is not meeting your standards or other people's standards, how come it doesn't? What's going on here? And if it is, or even exceeding at times those standards, then cherish that moment and kind of sit down and tell yourself, wow, I did good. A lot of times, basically, I measure my success by those moments. Like today, let's say, I talked to that person in the hallway and they were kind of frazzled about an interview, but after talking to them, they were kind of calm and then went into the interview. That by itself is a fantastic moment. So most of people who are really addicted, they have lost that. There's a void. They don't, and they are kind of following that trend, that culture around them. Everybody is doing that, let me do that as well. Everybody doing that, let me do that as well. In order to gain some kind of a meaningfulness and purpose in being alive. This is a very existential philosophy and way of thinking, and existentialism and humanism is based on this in terms of the whole dilemma that human beings have is not knowing the answers to those fundamental questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? What's the purpose of being alive, right? And the problem is that we're expecting an answer instead of creating an answer.
That's a good point.
We have to create an answer. And most people who are struggling with addiction, same thing. Even if they get sober, they want an answer. Okay, I got sober. I got over that problem. I went into the treatment center. So now what? Somebody tell me what to do. Right? Because the mind has not really changed from kind of engaging in that short-term gratification, following a culture, into more or less finding and creating a purpose in life. Once you do that, which we call finding yourself, then you don't look around. You don't look at what your neighbor is doing and follow the neighbor. You don't look at what family member is doing and follow them. You're just focused on what you want and what you need to do. You're so focused that suddenly even substances become nothing, not meaningful. The same, or gambling, or the sex, or the substances, or the relationships, or the work that was giving you so much, the neurotransmitters you needed, like dopamine or endorphins, etc., to feel good, they don't. Because you kind of realize how transitionary they are, how temporary they are, how futile and useless they are, and you have a lot more inner passion that is keeping you focused, that gives you endorphins that you need, gives you the dopamine for life. You're high all the time without using.
I like that.
Right?
That's tip number 2 then, finding yourself.
Finding yourself.
Finding a purpose.
Yes.
And one of the styles of mental health professionals, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or right, we'll go back to that lady who was avoiding something because she was working 68 hours a week. One of the things you'll do is find out why she's avoiding it.
Yes.
And then trying to help her find herself as well.
Right. And gain skills. Gain skills to overcome deficits. That it's not just an insight that we have to develop, right? We can't just rely on only developing an insight or helping a client develop insight. Oh, an aha moment. I figured it out. I know exactly what the problem is and what the solution should be. Like my solution should be, okay, I should be talking to my family members. But I don't have the skills to talking to my family members. I don't have the skills not to get upset. I don't have the skills not to cry and crumble and disappear. I don't have the skills to not get depressed. I don't have the skills not to get a panic attack. So it goes back to the skills, right? So yes, the foundation is let's kind of find that void, put our finger on it and say, oh, this is where it is. And you see it? Yes. Now let's bridge the gap. Let's build the skills for you to walk over that bridge. into the end destination that you want.
Very nicely done. Very nicely done.
Thank you.
So I know, I'm excited because I know in a few weeks on Tips and Tools, we're going to get into real specific things. We're going to get into the different types of drugs and how they influence us.
Absolutely.
And I think we're also going to get into different types of addictions, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Maybe even explore addiction to gaming,
Absolutely.
explore to sexual addiction.
Yes.
That's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of things there.
It will be. Thank
Unfortunately,
you.
there's a lot of things we can get addicted to.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get addicted to tips and tools. I don't know. Could that be a problem?
That shouldn't be a problem. That should be a
That shouldn't be a
solution.
problem.
Yeah.
Now, we want to talk a little bit before we wrap up. I know we got a couple minutes left. If we run out of time, we can explore this next time as well. But addicts seem to perceive the world a little differently as well as a person who's not addicted. In other words, they may see things in a negative light more so.
Yeah.
Maybe feel like the world's against them.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it goes back to that lack of functional abilities of the mind. The mind is no longer in harmony. The mind is no longer in a healthy state. So certainly it will tend to almost paint the external world the way the internal world works in disharmony. Right? The sense of need for congruence between external and internal experience is at the core of higher functioning. People who don't have that, they're psychotic. See people who are hallucinating, there's a different story inside that's happening to them than outside.
Very different story.
Right? That disconnection and incongruence between real world experiences, it's real to them internally. They're hearing something, they're believing something is happening. That's all a real internal world. And that's incongruent and disconnected from the actual reality around them. So if you think about it, that's a huge survival mechanism. A mind needs that, right? Otherwise we are flipping into psychosis. So if we need that congruence, it makes sense that an addict with a mind, internal world in disarray has to make the external world match the internal world. And therefore also paints a negative, grim picture of the external world.
Fascinating.
Right.
That's fascinating stuff. Yes. Thank you, Dr. G.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit more about Elite Care once again?
Yes, elitecaretreatment.com. That's a website that you can go to, 888-511-0607. There's a very skilled staff at Elite Care Treatment that would be available to yourself or your loved one to find out more about addiction, about solutions to addiction, overcoming substance use, dependence, and they have residential detox, outpatient, partial hospitalization, inpatient connections that they can help you with, and a lot of education. Please visit their website or call them directly.
We thank you very much for joining us. Hey, you know what? Please help us out. Go to therapycable.com, go to our Facebook page, and give us some comments, give us some questions. We've been asking all the questions we've been asking in the series in the last few weeks have been from you. We have some other ones coming up in the next few weeks, how to help addicts with their family, how to manage their addiction. Like I said, we're going to be exploring a lot of fun stuff in the future as well, different specific addictions from illicit drugs to gaming to sex. We're going to be looking at all those. So leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you want to know anything so we can help you out. This has been Tips and Tools on therapycable.com. See you next time.